So to share with us a little bit on where energy is going and how we need to look at that in the future ag paradigm, I'd like to invite Dave Williams to the stage to share with us. Dave?
Hello. Thanks, Monty, for having me and the whole AgEmerge team. I attended last year and was really excited about coming back this year. I also wanted to thank you all for being welcoming to me. I'm new to agriculture. I've been in energy about 20 years, but about just 3 years focused on energy inputs in ag. And from Dr. Beck's talk earlier, I really wanted to start with, where are we? And I think that agriculture and energy have sometimes forgotten about each other. Agriculture sometimes forget about the energy inputs, and vice versa. Energy a lot of the time forgets about the inputs that agriculture could provide. So just to start with, direct energy spend in the US agriculture is around $20 billion a year. And I say around because no one really knows. We look at the Energy Information Agency or the USDA or the EPA or people to keep track of this information. There's a really limited amount of statistics. In fact, this $20 billion number is built on some data from 2004. The last time there was a really detailed study around energy infrastructure in agriculture, and then again in 2016. But it's such a significant portion about that chart we saw earlier about the revenue versus profitability in agriculture. It's an input that's volatile, it's uncertain, and now we're living in a time where it's changing so rapidly that it's really impossible to guess what it will be tomorrow. And the real piece that I wanted to touch on here, and tomorrow we're really going to dive into, is that yes, it's $20 billion today, and it's my opinion by 2030 it will be $0. Because agriculture has a real role to play in the energy markets, and will start to be paid for that. So to start back this, where are we, kind of orientation piece, is that there's 915 million acres of US farmland. 1 square meter of the US, roughly, is about the same amount of energy that's in 1 barrel of oil. So by a whole bunch of, it's like fuzzy math, we end up with somewhere the trillions of barrels of oil. And that's 2 times the amount of oil that's in reserves that's knowable today. I'm not suggesting we're all going to move to solar. I'm not suggesting that the crops themselves aren't taking a significant portion of that. I'm just suggesting that there's a lot of energy that's landing on the earth that you are taking to turn into plants, and there's some portion of that energy that we're going to be able to make money on in other ways. So this is really, I think, an important part of this. Today there's 3,300 utilities across the United States. Roughly the same as 1923, and really not much has changed since 1923 for most of those. That infrastructure has been put in place at that time when we were electrifying rural America, but it's roughly the same position, the same architecture as it was. What we've also noticed is that the investor-owned utility has significantly taken over the marketplace. So of the 3,300 utilities, only about 170 of them support 75% of the population in the United States. Yesterday, centralized, indifferent, antiquated. So I wanted to dive into this a little bit, and I think it fits a lot of the themes we talked about earlier, is that the utilities are doing exactly what they were designed to do. They were taking electricity infrastructure that was primarily in the cities, and it was built to build out rural infrastructure across the entire United States, electrify the country, and for the common good, spread those costs around everyone in an equitable way that allowed everyone to have access to electricity. And it did that work, and it did it really well. The indifference piece is where I think a lot of times there's a lot of pieces, particularly in California, where you see rising energy costs and we're combating climate resilience work that needs to be done to the grid. A lot of times people say, oh, they're evil. They're really not evil, they're indifferent, and they're doing just as it was designed. But it's time for a new design, and what I think the theme that hopefully kind of aligns with a lot of things we've heard this morning is that revisiting of the energy infrastructure is already happening, but it's happening at a speed that we're not used to. And particularly the thing I learned last year at AgEmerge is a lot of these ag tech companies were solutions and look for a problem. And the ability to adopt them was really on these annual cycles or even generational cycles about how to move from thing to thing. Now we're seeing that the utility market in California is changing every month. So on-farm ag energy transition, I wanted to touch a little bit on like what these words mean, because I think a lot of times we talk about energy in agriculture. Like I said, we don't talk about it enough, but for me, on-farm ag energy is not taking land and putting solar panels on it. It is how do we put the resources behind the work we're doing now to get it efficient and putting together good plans that will last decades. So I think what we're going to start to see is that there's an increase in direct ag energy intensity in investing in infrastructure. So we've already seen it. In California, in the Central Valley, we've installed about $300 million worth of solar and battery storage. It was about $1.5 billion since 2016. So there's a tremendous amount of money that's being invested on-farm energy infrastructure. And that's new substations, that's new solar panels, that's storage, that's on-site generation, micro turbines, a real revisiting of how it works. Decreasing liquid fuel costs, increasing diesel and gasoline consumption. So as we saw diesel prices come down, consumption met that. I think what we're going to start to see is the electrification of everything and the consolidation of electricity and the liquid fuel markets. So we're seeing it now in dairy, who's trying to make decisions between burning fuel locally or selling renewable energy fuel in the pipelines. The electrification of equipment, I was telling someone at the break, like I think it is happening much, much faster than anyone will expect. That in California, we have the low carbon fuel standard credit, which is essentially a carbon tax, and is being given to those people that are adopting electric vehicles. It is so significant, and the amount of money is so high that you'll be able to get free equipment because it'll be paid for by your charging it. That's not in the future, that's today, and tomorrow we'll get into details of our current customers who are currently doing that and getting equipment that's on that. But it does require total paradigm shift. So when I've talked to Caterpillar and John Deere, they said, yeah, in 2050, we agree everything will be electrified and it will be amazing, but we're gonna start real incremental. And we're gonna start incremental now, and we're gonna electrify portions of tractors. But what I don't think people fully understand is that, agreed that energy density is not there today for us to be able to pull around those batteries with us. But what we can do is buy more and more tractors, and if you're getting them for cheaper and cheaper prices, because you're taking advantage of that infrastructure, then we'll just have more density through more equipment, not through bigger, huger systems. So today is a decentralized, dynamic, and difficult marketplace. It's very difficult to know what your energy bill is. I don't know if any of you have really tried to piece together how PG&E or the utility actually comes up with the price. If you get the simplified bill, it looks simplified. But if you get the detailed bill, very quickly you can't understand what they're talking about. And it's on purpose. It's built to be opaque, it's built to be complicated, and there's very clear mechanisms for the utility to compensate for programs like this that they don't see coming. Which means you need a partner. And you can't, and I think a lot of what I learned last year and started to see again today, the idea that you can have a single plan, you're gonna buy energy from the utility at whatever price they're selling it for, no longer works. You have to have a 10-year energy plan that requires and tomorrow we'll get into this, we've found over $1 million of missed billings for our customers, just in the Central Valley of California. We've found hundreds of thousands of rate optimizations. So from that first side, if there's 33,000 utilities and each one of them has 20, 50 tariffs, there are hundreds of thousands of options. So it's really difficult to know are you on the right plan? Is it the right plan for this pump? How does that fit with your business? We'll talk about some of these very specific instances where compliance and regulatory markets are shifting every day. So energy conservations, but environmental attributes. In February of this year, an environmental attribute in California was worth 50 cents per megawatt hour of solar generation. By June, it was worth $10, and today it's worth $21. So $21 from 50 cents just 6 months ago means that if you're busy focused on your farm, trying to figure out how to make money today, there's a whole nother marketplace that's happening that's growing at these drastic rates, and if you miss those windows, you will miss them completely. So it requires a real long-term plan of knowing where those regulatory markets are, how they're shifting, and then finally the revenue markets. It's my position that some verticals in agriculture will make most of their money through their energy production. Dairy being a good example of that in California with a lot of stress in dairy, we're gonna see more biodigesters, more low carbon fuel standard credits, and a lot more money that needs to be spent. So the real question here, and I think hopefully a lot of you feel really skeptical by my first slide, which is how can energy prices actually go to zero? And I want to get into the details tomorrow on exactly how that's going to happen. But essentially, in the world where we're going to unify liquid fuels and electricity, this orange bar on the far left is how much you're paying on your electricity bill plus how much diesel you're buying. Then the gray bar is an infrastructure investment of more battery storage, on-site generation, liquid fuel management, diesel hedging, all the things that go into energy production. But then you'll start to see the direct savings of that. So in California today, a lot of our customers are paying 12, 13 cents from the utility, and we charge about 6, 7 cents for our solar power. So that's not apples to apples, but for those kilowatt hours, they're saving roughly 50%, so you start to see some savings immediately. The next one is direct savings through energy planning and energy markets. So we'll talk a little bit about this tomorrow, but one of my favorite examples is a farm that the fellow that was turning on the irrigation pumps would turn them on before lunch and would just clip the high use period, and those lunches were costing about $45,000 because they would hit their peak at exactly precisely the wrong time. But there's no mechanism for the person in the field or in the office to really understand that until they get their bill 2, 3, 4 months in the future and say, oh, wow, we shouldn't have done that. And in a lot of cases, because what we described earlier, there's no energy partner. So even if they had access to the information, they may not be able to determine what instance actually created the $45,000 bill. And the final one is the energy markets. And I think this is the one that is the most exciting to me, that agriculture has a role to play in the energy markets, of a big role. And that's in the production of on-site biofuels, it's in the production of electricity, it's in dairy digesters and selling energy into the markets. One of the things we'll dive in tomorrow is we are currently selling capacity for our customers. So they're not participating in demand response, they're just telling the grid like, hey, if something bad happens, we're willing to turn off. For that, our customers are getting paid $30,000 to $50,000 a megawatt. They built nothing, they haven't responded. This isn't demand response. This is just the ability to participate in the market. And because agriculture has generally been forgotten by the large utilities, all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, these are large consumers, particularly in California with giant pumps, who can participate in this market, who they also didn't know there was a marketplace they could make money on. So this blue value is the one we'll really get in tomorrow, is that I believe for some customers immediately, and all customers eventually, there will be a net negative value for electricity. So agriculture will be paid for its energy consumption rather than paying for it. So tomorrow, it's electrified, market-driven, and asset-backed. We're going to see this dramatic electrification of everything. We've already started to see it. And it's primarily in forklifts today, but it is quickly going to move into everything in the next few years. It's market-driven. So now that we're seeing more dynamic pricing, Bitcoin, and things that are allowed decentralization of everything, we're going to see this happen even faster than we're already seeing it. We're already seeing massive transformations like month to month, let alone day to day, which we'll see those pieces. So how do you do this? And it's not simple. And I think this is a piece that I really want to kind of start to learn from everyone in this room of like, this isn't the core business, but it is a core input. So how do you take care of the assets that we're talking about buying? They're going to be sophisticated and expensive and complicated. How do you analyze the data from how different verticals are dealing with energy inputs? How do you forecast that data? And then how do you optimize the whole thing so that you've got the right assets in the right place and you're making as much money as possible from them? The AgEmerge services model. So this is a different model than what you'd see if you were looking at a movie theater or a shopping center. Ag actually has this give and take with the grid. And in California specifically, and other markets actually even more dramatically, agriculture is a huge consumer at certain parts of the grid and are putting a tremendous amount of demand where a little bit of collaboration in those parts of the grid would reduce the cost for everyone. But today we don't have a market mechanism to pay people to do that or find a place to collaborate. So what we're going to see, I think, is more energy resources, more energy intelligence. So how are we using our energy? What is it going to do? And then that forecasting piece of like, well, if there's a Fresno State football game tomorrow and it's 100 degrees, that changes the value of the energy at that time in tomorrow. So for our capacity markets, for our ag customers today, we're bidding in tomorrow's market because we know there's a value tomorrow. So that $30,000 to $50,000 number I said was like pretty much never responding. But you could actually get paid to respond if you were like, okay, well, we actually know there's going to be an opportunity to participate tomorrow, and I can make $1,000 if we just don't do anything from 4 to 8. And it really gets back to partnership. So I think that's the other piece, that the electrical markets aren't really organized to build partnerships, but this community is, and in aggregate is worth a whole lot more than doing it individually. So money doesn't grow on trees. So I think, hopefully that the skepticism from like, can this really be done, to okay, like maybe it can be done, but the Army Corps of Engineers said, hey, if you're going to fix the grid in the US, you're somewhere between $1 and $3 trillion, and it's going to take every local, state, federal, White House regulation groups to get together and come up with this plan and put the money behind it. And I think we can all agree that's never going to happen. So we're going to see more and more decentralized agriculture or resources. And the way to do that is structured finance. So I think the piece that I really want you to leave at least this conversation with is like, there's definitely a possibility that we're going to move from agriculture as an energy consumer to agriculture as an energy generator, and it's going to cost billions of dollars, and someone else is going to pay for it. Because agriculture is providing something that is extremely necessary that has been overlooked, which is access to the grid, it's on-site energy generation, and the ability to engage with the market in a way that makes money. So tomorrow we'll really dive into how structured finance will put that money to work. And to take some pretty bold statements that I want to, we can dive into all the details tomorrow, but in 2030, 90% of all agricultural equipment will be electrified. There will be very, very little on-site diesel consumption. There will be very little moving things that aren't powered up by batteries. And the average agriculture direct energy costs, so all diesel, all PG, or all utility bills, natural gas bills, all of those will be offset by the markets that agriculture is participating in for a no dollar piece. And 75% of agribusinesses will have on-site generation. And today there's roughly around 3%. But this decentralization of the global marketplace, particularly in ag, and a lack of centralized government and centralized regulation and centralized money, those days are behind us. Taking advantage of on-site, behind the farm gate infrastructure will allow a different paradigm to allow agriculture to participate in the future. And the final piece of this is that it'll all be done on somebody else's money. And we'll talk tomorrow about how that will be done. Thank you.